Imagine this, a vital, treacherous battle, lasting a grueling 871 days, with poor supplies and immense suffering, 2.5 years of constant agony inflicted on this key battle of World War II, one of the longest, most destructive sieges of any city in the world, a story of an epic battle, of a logistical miracle. This is the story of the Siege of Leningrad. Welcome to today's World Activities Report at War News Station. I'm Evan, and joined with me today are two neutral representatives for all belligerent countries in the Siege of Leningrad. We will analyze all important aspects of the siege. Then I will explain the battle from the civilians' point of view. Germany, the Soviet Union, and Finland were the countries involved. Joel will talk on behalf of the Allied powers, more specifically, the Soviet Union. Hander will talk on behalf of the Axis powers, more specifically, Germany and Finland. The siege lasted from September 8, 1941 to January 27, 1944 in the city of Leningrad, which is located in the Soviet Union. Let's start from the perspective of the Soviet Union. Here's Joel Trejo in Leningrad on the battle scene on behalf of the Soviet Union. Hello Joel, please give us a synopsis of what happened in the siege of Leningrad.
Thanks, Evan. For the past 2.5 years, the Soviets have held a prolonged defense against the Germans' offensive military blockade on the city of Leningrad. In the end, the Soviets, with an estimated initial manpower of 930,000 soldiers, persevered and came out victorious in the resistance against the Germans. However, they suffered heavy casualties. As of today on January 27, 1944, it is reported that in total, 1,018,000 Soviet soldiers were killed, captured, or missing, with another 2,418,000 Soviet soldiers reported wounded from the battle. Many of these deaths have been a harsh result of the constant cold and hunger for these past 29 months.
What has happened over on the Soviet side of this battle, and why and how did they fight?
Well, 2 years ago on September 8, 1941, the German and Finnish forces completely besieged Leningrad, cutting off the Soviet soldiers and civilians of Leningrad from all railroad connections, which was their only possible lifeline of food and other supplies at the time. The Soviets were trying to defend their territory, and as they were threatened by Germany's blockade of supplies and salvation, Soviet forces and citizens at Leningrad were forced to resist or stay marked to death and starvation. In their sheer determination, Soviet forces powerfully stood and held out at their siege lines, quickly building anti-tank fortifications that would be successful in holding a stable defense. Yet they would still be cut off from all access to vital supplies. Some relief would be brought 3 months after the initial siege when winter arrived and temperatures dropped below -40°C, allowing the lake of Ladoga to freeze and act as a supply lifeline for essential food and ammunition to be brought to the Soviet troops at the front lines. The siege on the Soviet forces would continue up to a year and a half, up until the Soviets would build up the strength to go on the counteroffensive. And on January 12, 1943, commanded by Marshal Kirill Mersvak and Leonid Gurlov, Soviet forces would create a breach in the German blockade of the city, pushing the Germans westward and bringing the siege to an end on January 27, 1944.
Now, what types of Soviet weaponry were used on this side of the battle?
The weaponry of the Soviets in this battle was relatively uniform and adapted to be used for the purposes of defending Leningrad. The Mosin Nagant was the most widely used infantry rifle due to its ease of mass production and its reliability and accuracy. The Soviets also used these anti-tank guns and light tanks, which were used to combat the Germans' established and well-fortified defense blockade. Planes were not introduced to the Soviets in this battle until much later on. Initially, Soviet aircraft was only a couple months into production, and thus were never rigorously tested throughout the war. However, as the battle continued and the aircraft prevalence increased among Soviet forces, it was vital to intercept and repel the Luftwaffe's bombing raids on the city.
Thank you, Joel, for being with us today. Let's move on to the Axis powers' point of view of this battle. Here is Hander on behalf of Germany and Finland. Hello, Hander. Please give us a synopsis of what happened in the battle.
Why, of course. By the time of Hitler's directive, Germany had already set up artillery and launched a campaign to shell Leningrad into submission. Hitler wanted to take Leningrad, as if he did, the Germans would be able to go and capture Moscow, which would benefit them in winning the war. Also, if they had taken a city of the Soviets, it would have been a moment of triumph for Nazi advancement. This is due to Leningrad being a culturally significant city, which was perfect for Hitler's ideology of Nazism. German Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb had the idea of starving the city until Leningrad would give up and belong to the Germans. The Germans had started by surrounding Leningrad and cutting off their supply routes. This would prevent all food coming into the city. This, paired with their weaponry, would prove to be a challenge for Leningrad.
Okay. Please explain what, why, and how the siege ensued.
The Germans dropped thousands of leaflets announcing the defeat of the USSR to the population. German soldiers were seen using carabiner 98K rifles, in most cases seen during trench combat, as the rifle is equipped with a bayonet. The Germans launched many offensives to break through Leningrad's defense with their weaponry. Germany's artillery was used to shell the city and weaken the Soviet forces. German tanks such as the Tiger and Panther tanks were used to breach the city and engage in urban combat. The Luftwaffe raided the city from the air and made the situation even worse for Leningrad. The battle was intense, but due to Germany lacking the manpower, they were not able to win Leningrad. This resulted in them retreating and being pushed back by the Soviet Red Army. The number of casualties is 579,985 for the Germans.
Now let us talk about the siege of Leningrad from the civilians' point of view. What happened to the civilians? Well, a lot happened to the civilian population. Instead of evacuating, the people stayed to support this important city. They were collectively determined to stop the Germans. This motivation is also in part due to their knowledge of Hitler's ideology. They knew they would all be killed under Germany's regime. The civilians constantly helped as much as possible, from tasks of fortification to digging trenches. When winter started, supplies for civilians such as food were scarce. Civilians and soldiers were surviving on 300 calories per day, which is about 3 slices of bread. Hundreds starved or froze to death daily, and many resorted to cannibalism. It was so bad that the police force's new purpose was to stop cannibalism. The police force of the city was also undermanned since the majority of them were sent to fight on the front. Also note, people simply could not just escape through the frozen lake because it was very hazardous. Many people lost their lives trying to escape through the lake. To solve the problem of transporting goods, a railroad was built through the area and multiple operations were initiated to improve access to the city. But even if it was not winter, the civilians suffered from constant sieges that bombed the cities into rubble. But the Soviets would defend and continue operations no matter what happened. It doesn't matter if the Luftwaffe was constantly bombing the city and targeting the frozen lakes. Bus stations were still operational. Schools were still offering classes, even if the building was destroyed. And people still worked. The civilians also got many diseases, but the disease spread was limited due to very successful efforts of quarantining the sick people. To give statistics to help grasp the bravery and harshness endured by the city, the civilian population of the city of Leningrad was about 3 million before the battle started. After the battle, civilian deaths are estimated between 670,000 and 1.5 million. Only about 700,000 remained in the city. Thank you for watching War News, and we thank Joel and Hander for reporting. Stay tuned for more news on the way.